So that particular body of work, Second Childhood and Hard to Death, by extension, was really a critique not only of the ways that a lot of young men kind of perform their masculinities, but in the ways in which we respond, to that performance. So it's thinking about what does that mean to be so hard, that having a stint in prison is a mark of your manhood, or the selling drugs, or having 5 or 6 children out of wedlock is a mark of pride. Like, how do we begin to reframe the narrative? So because a lot of times it sounds like love is missing, so if you don't love yourself, it's hard for you to love somebody else. And so what can we do to inspire, to instill, and to express that love?
That's the thing, though. It is like, what do we do? Because it gets to a point where we just feel hopeless, almost, in a sense, because we have the people that know the problem, and then I feel like it's a big gap. Even when everything happened with Trayvon Martin, and we're trying to do these rallies, and we're doing all these things, lacking organization and unity, and it's just like, well, what do we do? Like, how can we change things? So it's just like, how do we close that gap?
Yeah, I personally don't ascribe to the notion of hopelessness. I feel like that's a choice. Like I always tell my son, you can be a victim or a victor. You decide. And at a certain point, we have to decide that we're not hopeless, that we actually do have a choice, that we do have options, that we can move in the world in the ways in which we want to move, but we can only do that when we start doing it. We can't be talking about trying to do it. We can't be talking about, and we can't be tearing each other down in the process, So we have to learn to find ways to appreciate, to understand, to connect to one another, but figure out, in that same sense, like, okay, son, I see you're doing something that you should not be doing. Let me impart wisdom on you. But the son also has to be willing to listen to that, right? And so I think there's this, notion of give and take. There's this notion of community that we really need to work on and continue to build. And, and I hope that my art can be a part of that process. I would say my target audience is everybody.
Okay.
I focus my dialogue around black men, and particularly young black men between the ages of 18 and 25, because it's such a pivotal period in the development of black men. And I think about it from the standpoint of my own experience during that age period, and I remember a lot of the decisions that I made were based on fear, at that time, under the guise of having it all together, and under the guise of being tough and hard, but I was really afraid, like I tell the story often of being, like marking my birthdays by the tragedies that I had avoided, Wow. So, 19 years old, man, I ain't been shot. 21 years old, never been to jail. 22 years old, no children. You know what I mean? Like, thinking like all of those statistics, all of those negative ideas that surrounded, the narratives of black masculinity were my destiny. And ultimately getting to a point where, I could look back and be like, that was some BS. Yeah, that could have happened, but it didn't have to happen. Just because something could happen doesn't mean it's going to happen, right? But like now, as I move forward in the world, and thinking about the impact that I can have, and thinking about the work that I'm doing, like I really want to talk to that group, but not just to that group, like because again, it's not just the performance of black masculinity that I'm looking at, but it's also the reading, and a lot of times that fear comes from the fact that the rest of the world is projecting their fears onto you, and so you're afraid, so it's just like giving this exchange of fears. Everybody's just afraid of what the next person is going to do, as opposed to having a different kind of outlook or a different perspective on what can be.